This year marks an important gap in the string quartets of composer Steve Reich. Last year, the Kronos Quartet released a recording of his WTC 911 to mark the 10th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. And next year will mark the 25th anniversary of his monumental composition, the string quartet Different Trains, which is something of a meditation on the Holocaust. Even if you haven't heard these pieces before, it shouldn't take you very long to hear why Different Trains was so groundbreaking. We hear recordings of train noises while the quartet mimics the rhythmic sound of wheels pushing against steel. This is certainly something you wouldn't expect to hear in the work of Mozart or Beethoven, but there's still one more critical element that really puts this composition on the map: the human voice.
Different trains every day. Different trains. Different trains every day. Different trains. Different trains every day. Different trains.
Reich becomes a sort of musical photographer and then a collage artist, taking snippets of actual speech, mutating them, and ultimately weaving them together into a piece of substance, terror, and beauty. More than any other composer before him, Reich maps out the natural melodies of the human voice. And while that's all technically and musically quite impressive and interesting, there's an equally profound human element to the music. Reich grew up as a Jewish American in World War II, traveling across the country by train to visit his separated parents. Years later, Reich realized that if he were in Europe at that same time, he could have been riding a very different train to one of the concentration camps dotted throughout that continent. Reich's experience with trains clearly informs the structure of the work. The opening section is called America Before the War. It's lively and, quite frankly, fun. But then the second section, Europe During the War, comes crashing down, and the fun is suddenly over. Siren wails introduce this haunting and unsettling movement. One of the many strokes of genius in Different Trains is that these spoken snippets get stuck in your head. Take, for example, this interview with a Holocaust survivor recounting a story of his teacher describing how Jews invaded his country.
He said, "Black crows invaded our country many years ago," and he pointed right at me. Pointed right at me.
Every once in a while, I'll be out on a walk or driving through town, and I'll find myself repeating the line, "Black crows invaded our country." I don't like it. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I don't like to think about it. But this is how Steve Reich has kept the Holocaust relevant for almost 25 years after Different Trains was first penned. These haunting audio images will flash through your mind long after you've heard the relief of the third movement, titled After the War. And the musical legacy of Different Trains is immediately apparent in Reich's latest string quartet, WTC 911, commissioned by the Kronos Quartet to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the events of September 11th, 2001. The work begins abruptly with the sound of a phone left off its hook. It's distressing, it's disconcerting and anxious, and before long we hear, as in Different Trains, the melodies of manipulated speech.
They came from Boston on the airline, and I heard sound.
Now, some critics have accused Reich of just rehashing his techniques from 25 years ago, implying that WTC 911 is somehow a lazy composition or an exercise in laurel resting. But I disagree for two reasons. First, why must we expect each living composer to write an unconnected series of totally dissimilar pieces? Franz Joseph Haydn wrote almost 70 string quartets, which all sound more or less the same. He had a style, and he was developing his craft and the medium in general, and that took some time and a lot of similar-sounding music. In that same vein, Reich's use of speech and music was revolutionary, and I think it deserves a few more pieces before we discard it as antiquated. I guess what I'm saying is, composing just one pair of similar-sounding string quartets hardly saturates the market. And second, WTC 911 is innovative. Reich carries the speech manipulation further than he did in different trains. He's developed a technique to extend the sound of the voice, which he uses to great effect in creating new harmonies and sounds. Listen to the beginning of the second movement.
I was sitting in class, 4 blocks north of Ground Zero.
I was taking my kids to school. The first plane went straight over our heads. Went straight over our heads and into the building.
Do you hear how, after the voices have stopped speaking, their voice continues on in this kind of ghostly, ethereal, digital song? This voice extension technique also bridges the different utterances to help the continuity and flow of the piece. As a result, the segments aren't as abrupt as they are in different trains, which fits the style of WTC 911.
Towers just in flames.
But we all thought it was an accident.
One of the key differences between the two pieces is the arrestingly beautiful section of WTC 911's last movement. Reich uses recordings of Jewish mourners who sang psalms over the bodies of victims and folds it on top of itself to produce a rich and wonderful soundscape. Listening to these two string quartets, I don't know if I can say that Steve Reich has improved over the past 25 years. He was already a mature composer who had come into his own when he wrote different trains, but this latest string quartet, WTC 911, shows at least a technological development in his craft, and at a little over 15 minutes in length, it shows restraint in an age when most composers are given to excess.
And there's the world right here.
What these two string quartets are is a landmark in American classical music. Reich has taken fragments of history to create two similar but unique works of great social, musical, and spiritual significance. And it almost goes without saying that in the hands of the ever-capable Kronos Quartet, these pieces shine. It may not be music you'd run to or have on the background while you do the dishes, but it's certainly worth hearing again and again. You can find both albums, Different Trains and WTC 911, on any major online music store or in fine record stores across the country. For BYU Radio, this is Michael Wyatt.